And did you have trouble accessing the webinar link, Josh? I'm just worried that other people who registered might have the same issue. Sorry.
No, you're good. I was gonna say, so one of the emails had the links had expired, but then I went back to, like, because I got three emails from T Sophie, so one of them said expired, but then the other one worked. So
Okay, perfect.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
I had Josh respond in the chat saying it was easy too. So
Oh,
we got two Joshes on this webinar, but responses from either one work. So we'll go ahead and wait and get started at 10:05 just so that we give time for people to hop on.
Okay.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Usually we have people hop on later on into the presentation, um, if they haven't already hopped on. So, okay, good afternoon. My name is Haley. I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few things surrounding webinar logistics. So please remember to mute your lines. If you have a question, please feel free to type it in the comment box or the chat box, and the presenter will try and answer them at the end of her or his presentation. Please complete the post-webinar evaluation using the survey form provided for you at the end of the webinar. I will copy and paste this link into the chat box as well and remind you before hopping off this presentation. If you are CHES or MCHES, you are required to complete the evaluation to receive one continuing education unit. And then last but not least, if you would like to be a featured presenter in our webinar series or for the virtual hen meetings, please email texassophie@gmail.com. Okay, so today's webinar is titled First Offender Program, Evidence-Based Approaches to Restorative Justice for Juvenile Delinquents. It's presented by Kelsey Kraker, is that? Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure I was pronouncing that correctly. And so Kelsey is a certified health education specialist and holds a master's in public health and health promotion and behavioral sciences with a certificate in health disparities. This Aggie turned Longhorn found a passion for working with vulnerable populations while serving on a medical brigade in Nicaragua, leading her to pursue a graduate level degree. She has a background in restorative justice interventions, working with juvenile delinquents and nonviolent first offenders. Kelsey desires to one day run her own nonprofit working on early intervention for at-risk youth and juvenile delinquents. So please join me in welcoming our presenter, Kelsey.
All right, let me get my screen shared here. All right, so my name is Kelsey Kraker. I'm joined by one of my colleagues, Joshua Yetkin, and we've been working on this presentation. I've been on this project for a while, or working on this project for a while. So it is the First Offender Program. It's evidence-based approaches to restorative justice for juvenile delinquents. So kind of the overall problem we see here in the United States is juvenile delinquency. Juvenile delinquency is often categorized as status offenses. So it's going to be crimes that are unique to those who are underage. You're going to see truancy, underage drinking and smoking, the underage trying to purchase alcohol or tobacco. You're also going to see misdemeanors like vandalism, trespassing, fighting, and drug possession, and then even up to felonies like sexual assault and murder. In 2018, in the United States, we saw over 700,000 juvenile arrests, more than 55,000 in Texas, and Dallas County alone had 5,300 juvenile arrests. So when we find youth in the justice system, 33% of referrals to juvenile probation are a result of a behavior that occurred in the school system. And just 3 years ago, 20,000 17-year-olds were arrested in Texas and were subjected to the adult prison system. And 95% of those arrests were for nonviolent or misdemeanor offenses. And when we look at youth in the justice system, there are several disparities there. Youth of color do make up the majority of youth in the juvenile justice system. And when we compare them to white youth, African American youth are twice as likely to be arrested, 3 times as likely to be arrested for violating something as simple as a curfew law, 44% more likely to be arrested for a drug violation, and almost 9 times as likely to be placed in an adult prison system. And when you compare that to Hispanic youth, they are 41% more likely to receive an out-of-home placement, which means something like they are not sentenced to probation, but they are confined to either a juvenile detention center or an adult prison. They're going to be seen in the adult court system 43% more, and 40% more likely to be placed in an adult prison system. And American Native youth are 10% more likely to receive that out-of-home placement and 1.84 times more likely to be sent to an adult prison system. And I'm going to let my colleague Josh talk about some of the risk factors that we see for delinquency.
Thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, so as we can see on this slide shows a myriad of risk factors for juvenile delinquency. As with any public health issue, we know that there are both non-modifiable or fixed risk factors and modifiable risk factors. Examples of non-modifiable risk factors include single-parent households, young parental age, domestic abuse, and low socioeconomic status. Examples of modifiable risk factors could include the lack of education, the lack of prevention programs, and the perceived peer delinquency norms. Equally important is to understand that there is significant interaction in these risk factors, and they often appear in what the famous epidemiologist Kenneth Rothman labeled as the constellation of factors rather than alone. Both in Europe and in the United States, the 18th century was a century of transition in thought, ideology, politics, but specifically in terms of the penal system, it was a transition from corporal punishment to imprisonment. In the old Occident, non-capital crimes were classically punished with corporal punishment and, or in the later years, by banishing offenders to colonial districts such as Australia or the American colonies, in fact. As part of this old order, there were two separate institutions that were merged into what made the modern prison system in the United States. And those two institutions were jails and workhouses. Specifically, jails were either for those who were accused of a crime and waiting for their trial, and or for the confinement of debtors and or religious or political offenders. Workhouses were used to repress vagrants and paupers and were not often, or were not open at all actually for the reception of felons. During the 18th century, organizations like the Quaker-based Society of Friends in Philadelphia introduced new ideas like substituting imprisonment for corporal punishment in the treatment of criminals and combining the prison and the workhouse. So while technically imprisonment was first introduced in America in the year 1655, the year 1788 was the true introduction when a law prescribed imprisonment for disorderly conduct. So on this slide, we have three important institutions and dates. So let's take a look at some of the most important milestones that introduced a reformative and a restorative approach to our justice system. It's important to remember that the dialogue that took place between America and Europe during the colonial period was significant. The French Revolutionary Penal Code of 1791 explicitly stated that the new purpose of the penal code is to, quote, not merely to punish, but to reform the culprit. Then in 1825, the New York House of Refuge was opened as the first institution for juvenile delinquents in the country in Madison Square in New York on January 25th, 1825, due to the efforts of local philanthropists such as Thomas Eddy and John Griscom. It was the first movement to what would become the juvenile justice system of today. Initially, it merely confined poor and delinquent youth, but due to many factors, it eventually became a reform school or a correctional institution, a pillar of the juvenile justice system of today. While almost 100 years after the French Penal Code was written, we say this vision was realized for adults when the Elmira Reformatory opened in 1877, and the embodied key ideas of the time that included, 1, an emphasis on reformation, 2, commutation of sentence for good behavior, individualized grading and classification systems of prisoners. We also had productive labor and the parole system were all introduced during this period as well.
So when we look at a contemporary look at juvenile delinquency, in the 1990s, we saw this public safety and accountability period where we were tough on crime and adult crime equaled adult time. This is just after, the war on drugs started in the 80s, and we're seeing this transition over to our youth as well. Now, when you look at the 2000s, we've got punitive policies. We realize that punitive policies cause more harm than good. And we're starting to understand that most youth do respond positively to diversionary programming rather than being locked up or sentenced to a prison time. From 2000 to 2012, across the country, we saw a 31% decrease in juvenile arrests. And during this time, we see legislative reform as well You see states increasing the age of consent and the age of what we consider a minor. Some states were as low as 15 years old, considering them an adult. Most states now are between the ages of 17 and 18. And you're seeing the dismantling of punitive and zero tolerance policies in our school system. So there's several paths to incarceration. First and foremost, we see a lack of restorative justice policies within our school system. And this leads to what we call the school to prison pipeline. So punitive school policies, like automatic expulsion and suspensions, and zero tolerance policies lead to an increase in students being kicked out of the school system. Factors like school exclusion, if someone is a minority and or low income, and criminal justice tools like metal detectors and canine units within the school system increase this expulsion rate and incarceration rate. So what is restorative justice? It's going to be a disciplinary approach that engages all parties who are impacted by whatever behavior happened in a balanced manner. It's going to be a conflict resolution practice, and it brings in students, teachers, families, and the community as a whole, and it promotes academic achievement and school and community safety. And this is going to build on existing relationships and complement other non-disciplinary practices like peer mediation and youth courts. And currently in Texas, a couple years ago, there was a bill that was proposed to have this be in all of our school systems, but that was not passed. And so we currently have no restorative justice legislation in the state. So this school to prison pipeline, we see zero tolerance policies. Now these are policies in place where students are removed from schools for committing some unacceptable infraction. And unacceptable is a very vague and broad term that pretty much means whatever the school deems as unacceptable, you can be removed from the school for that. And then we see this increase of police on campuses like school resource officers, and that increases referrals to the justice system and results in higher suspension and expulsion rates. And this does disproportionately affect minority youth and those who have experienced trauma, because we don't focus on trauma-informed care within our schools or with our officers. So there's factors at school, and there's individual factors and environmental factors happening at home. And this leads to exclusionary discipline, negative outcomes, and ultimately can lead to prison. So these punitive practices focus on punishing the wrongdoer rather than solving the underlying issue or finding justice for the person who was harmed. So when we see this removal of whoever has harmed another, often the person who was harmed has no chance of feeling like they've been vindicated in whatever justice is performed. So we also see punitive school discipline policies remove students from the classroom, they deny them educational opportunities, and they ultimately fail to make schools safer. The presence of law enforcement in schools increases serious and minor crimes, and in fact, these punitive practices aided in tripling the national prison population between 1987 and 2007. And so we see that from 2015 to 2016, there were 2.7 school suspensions in K through 12, and we had over 120,000 school expulsions. So when students are suspended or expelled, they are twice as likely to drop out as students who have not. And when we see students in the justice system, 23% of those students were disciplined in middle or high schools. And we see that the disparities continue here, that African American youth make up only 17% of our school system nationally, yet they make up almost 40% of suspensions and 40% of all expulsions nationwide. So the cost of our incarcerated youth is very high. So the United States overall has the highest incarceration rate in the entire world at 655 per 100,000 people. We see that on any given day, there's over 48,000 youth locked up away from home as a result of some juvenile or criminal justice involvement. And a staggering 4,500 of those youth are actually in the adult prison system as well. What we spend on our youth is astronomical. We spend between 8 to 21 billion annually on youth incarceration, and that averages out to about $408 a day per youth. In Texas alone, we spend higher than the national average at $480 per day per incarcerated youth. However, when you look at probation and community service options, We only spend $190 per day for youth on probation and just $29 a day for youth sentenced to community supervision. And when you look at the overall cost, we spend $8,000 each year per student we educate in Texas, yet $159,000 on each youth we incarcerate. So once a youth does go through the criminal justice system, we've got what we call collateral consequences. These are consequences that are not handed down directly by the justice system, but what occur as a result. And so we're going to kind of take a look at each of these on a different level. So when you look at homelessness, so people when they are released from jail are released with limited finances. Housing policies are very strict in that they often don't allow people with a record to apply or obtain housing. And when you look at drug convictions specifically, people are often immediately ineligible for public housing. And the first month after release is the most vulnerable period when you have the highest chance of homelessness and recidivism. And for public assistance, most states ban those who have drug convictions from receiving public assistance, food stamps, or cash assistance. People are unable to get healthcare coverage. So any treatment they were receiving in the jail system or medication they were getting is halted, and it can often lead to an increase in mental health issues as well. And any form of a record can disqualify the formerly incarcerated from receiving public assistance, food stamps, housing, and even getting student loans to go back to school. So further, we see attrition as a huge consequence. So among formerly incarcerated people, only 50% have their high school diploma or GED, and 25% have no credentials at all. And once released, people often do not get the chance to make up these educational opportunities they've missed. And the general public is going to be 8 times more likely to complete college than any formerly incarcerated person. Unemployment, we see that employers are reluctant to hire those with a record. There's a stigma surrounded by that, and they are unsure if they are going to be able to provide stable quality work. And if they can find jobs, they are jobs without benefits. There's no upward potential. They're often hourly workers, and they often are unable to obtain technical licenses to even work as a trade craftsman. So kind of a unique solution to this problem, specifically focusing on youth, is the Dallas County First Offender Program. So it was founded in 1974 by the Dallas Police Department. It's a voluntary skills building educational program. And what this program is for is to keep youth out of the justice system. So it's 6 weeks of skill building, and there's a 90-day probationary period. And then if they complete all of this within the set guidelines, their record is expunged. There's separate classes for youth and their parents. And we do see a recidivism rate of 10% for those who complete the program. And then for those who enroll in the program but do not complete it, the recidivism rate jumps up to 33%. This program is only offered in the city of Dallas, specifically Dallas Police Department, and we see the Dallas Independent School District Police can refer students to this program. No other city or county offers a program of this nature. So the criteria for this program, you have to be a youth between the age of 10 to 16. It has to be the very first time you're taken into custody, committed some form of non-violent class A or B misdemeanor or a state jail felony. Anyone who's committed a violent offense is not eligible for this program. You'd be referred by the Dallas Police Department, and the youth and their guardian have to consent to the program. It does consist of 3 phases. There's intake, where there's initial assessment between a caseworker and the youth and their parent. There's the direct phase, where it's the 6 weeks of skills training programming. And then the third phase is that 90-day probationary period. So at intake, a caseworker meets with the youth and a guardian, and they do an initial assessment. They focus on the youth's home, school, and social life. And this time, they do a little quiz with the youth, and they determine their strengths and weaknesses in those 3 aspects at home, school, and social. And what they do in that time is they establish a goal for the youth to meet to improve on one of their weaknesses over this 6-week program. So the direct phase is 6 weekly group meetings for both youth and parents. The youth are taught skills that aid in living, learning, and working. And the skills are meant to enhance their physical, emotional, and intellectual functioning. And the overall goal that we would talk to the youth about every week is living life on your own terms. Because when you're locked up or you're grounded or something like that, you are not living life on your own. You can't make your own choices. And so we want the youth to strive to be able to think independently and live life on their own terms. So the skills building classes for the youth, we do, first week is just orientation and group overview. We discuss what's going to happen throughout the program. Second week, we look at being prepared and decision making. Third week is attending and observing. And at the same time, the parents are learning a separate set of skills. So they are learning challenges of raising youth in the 21st century. The second week, we work on contracting, where they work on setting rules for the house, like if you do the dishes by 3 p.m. every day, you can play an hour of video games. Whatever works for the home and for the youth, that will get them motivated to do that. And we work on setting those rules and adding to it each week. And the third week, the parents work on praising their child. We find that when youth are making mistakes and they are getting in trouble a lot, the parents find it difficult to praise. And then we see harsher punishments and harsher disciplines in that. And so teaching and reinforcing that praise is important to your youth, we see more positive results this way. So the fourth week with the youth, we work on listening and greeting. And the fifth week is drug abuse education. So we talk about everything from marijuana, alcohol, tobacco, all the way to the hard stuff, amphetamines, heroin, things like that, and talk about what happens when you start abusing and using drugs. And then the sixth week, we do a review, and then they graduate from the program. They get a little certificate, and we have a ceremony, we do food, things like that. The parents in the second half work on appropriately disciplining their child, and this kind of goes again with, we're trying to decrease harsher discipline and work towards that positive reinforcement. And the fifth week, we see a little more intense of the drug abuse education, but it's pretty similar to what the youth learn at the same time. And then they review as well the last week. So this 90-day probationary period begins the day after they finish the 6-week program. Their caseworker continues to monitor their attendance and behavior in school. So one of the things we really harp on is no tardies, no absences. So the kids are in school and they are staying out of trouble. So they cannot be rearrested or have any tickets. This does exclude traffic violations in this 90-day period. And then after 90 days, their caseworker is able to go in and clear their record for them. So ultimately, what makes the first offender program different? It's offered at no cost to participants. When I was looking up other programs in the state, others were as high as $550. And when you look at the population that we see, it's mostly minority and low income in our program. And that kind of cost is just not feasible. So this program is offered at no cost, and it's not just for drug education. Many other programs in the county or in the state are only offered for first-time drug offenders, and this is just a first-time offender period. And another unique thing about this program is that Mondays are offered in English, or the first class is offered in English, and there's another class during the week that's offered solely in Spanish. So we are not missing anyone by that language barrier. And then we offer that record expungement after the 6-week program and the 90-day probationary period. So when you look at the program, it sees about an average of 400 youth a year, give or take. And the total cost to the city is $1,288 per youth. So that is significantly lower than what we're spending each day on youth that are already incarcerated throughout the state. So some recommendations that I do have for this program is that while we see Dallas County as just one of the many with a large juvenile population that's growing rapidly, yet it's the only city in Texas that offers this kind of program. We should see more trauma-informed care and diversionary programming. This has been proven to reduce recidivism more than traditional incarceration. And diversionary programming can reduce the human cost of victimization and save tax dollars. Effective diversionary programs can also increase community safety, prevent recidivism, and increase community involvement. So I think the FOP should be implemented across the state and beyond in order to combat the juvenile delinquency problem around this country. And I am happy to take any questions. I know that was kind of an info dump. There's a lot to cover on topics like this.
Hey, Kelsey, I have a question, but I'm going to type it into the chat box so that all of the participants can.
Sure. So Haley asked, we talked about the decision-making component of the program, and if we offer any mental health screenings and or resources available to address adverse childhood experiences or other mental health conditions. So the youth meet with their caseworker pretty often. They have to check in on the phone every single day. It doesn't have to be a conversation. It can just be call, leave a voicemail saying, hey, this is me checking in, bye. And it's just to hold the youth accountable to, they have consequences if they don't check in. But during this check-in, they also can leave a voicemail saying, hey, I really need to talk to you. Please call me back. And then the caseworkers will call them, and then they can discuss kind of what's going on in the home. And then the caseworkers do have the ability to refer out anyone who needs any extra mental health help or, provide resources. We've got tons of pamphlets in the office. And so we will hand out any brochures or have those conversations when needed for those youth or their families that do need that extra help. Yeah, and so if there's no more questions, I'm happy to field any emails or things like that. It's my email is going to be kelsey.kraker@gmail.com, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions or things like that if anyone has them later on. And thanks for listening to me.
Sorry, I had one more question. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure.
Does the program include any like cultural competency trainings or cultural relevancy trainings for any of like the program staff or anything like that?
So we have a very diverse staff as is, female, males, all sociodemographics, things like that. I interned with this program, so I didn't get anything like that. However, I know that they brought on a new caseworker while I was there, and she got a full in-depth training, and she did get cultural competency and trainings like that to help make sure that we're offering the most well-rounded care that we can.
Okay. I think if there are no other questions, we can go ahead and wrap everything up. Again, if you have any other questions, please feel free to email Kelsey.
Yes, please.
Let me go ahead and go back to this last slide. One more, and then let's see. Okay, so please be sure to fill out the evaluation link. Let me go ahead and copy and paste that link into the chat box so that everyone has it for your records. 1 second. So in order to receive CEUs, you have to fill out this evaluation link, so please be sure to fill it out. 1 second. Okay, so that is a link for the evaluation. Please be sure to fill that out before or after this webinar presentation closes up. It might also pop up as soon as you close. Sometimes we have that link embedded as popping up after the presentation. But again, if you have any other questions, please feel free to email Kelsey. Thank you so much, Kelsey and Josh, for this presentation. Have a good rest of your guys' day.
Thanks so much.